Hey everybody, hope you guys are healthy and safe. So remember back in the early days of OnePlus, they were a brand that offered hardware that was so much superior to the competition, at least on the spec sheets, going by the numbers, that you had to pay attention. OnePlus was the first phone to give you 120 Hz refresh rate when everybody else was at 60. OnePlus was the first to give you, I remember, 8 gigs of RAM and I believe 12 gigs of RAM back when every other phone was on like 6 or even 4 gigs of RAM. And OnePlus gave us fast charging before everyone else. Like, I remember how crazy it was to get like the first 60 or 80 watt charging brick back at a time when the other phones like from LG and Samsung were charging at like 25 or 30 watt. So going by pure numbers, like, you had to pay attention whether or not you actually decided to go with the OnePlus phone. But then over the last few years, I guess because Android hardware kind of hit a plateau and everyone started offering very premium hardware, so OnePlus kind of lost that edge. For example, if you look at the OnePlus 12, where there's battery capacity, RAM, or display resolution or refresh rate, it wasn't necessarily that much higher than what Samsung was offering in their flagship at the time, which I believe was the S24 Ultra. So I'm happy to report the OnePlus 15 is kind of like a return to form for OnePlus. If you look at the spec sheet, there are several numbers here that kind of pop off the spec sheet and are way better than what you're gonna get from competing phones, especially if we're just focusing on the US market. Most specs anyways, because there is one area, the cameras, where the numbers actually downgraded a bit. But otherwise, this is a phone with numbers that are very attention grabbing. Okay, so let's run through the numbers really quick. So the OnePlus 15 features a 6.8-inch OLED display, but it has a 165 Hz refresh rate. The battery in here, it's a 7,300 mAh cell. Now again, if you review OnePlus from a more US-centric perspective, this is a significantly bigger battery than what you're gonna get from Google, Samsung, or Apple. Like, we're not talking about just like a 5 or 10% bigger battery, but like almost like a 40-50% bigger battery. This phone also has 3 chips inside, one of which is the brand new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite. This is the first phone to hit North America with the Qualcomm chip. This guy's also running on the latest RAM, LPDDR5X Ultra. It is also certified for 3 levels of IP resistance rating. Remember a few years ago when OnePlus wouldn't even give you 1 IP rating. Now you have 3. You have IP68, IP69, and IP69K. Finally, there's a customized gyroscope in this guy that, according to OnePlus, is the most precise gyroscope in the mobile industry. So how much do these high numbers matter in real life? The 165 Hz will matter if you're a gamer, but if you're not a gamer, then I guess it doesn't matter that much, because when you're using the phone normally, refresh rate maxes out at 120. The 165 only kicks in when you're playing select games that support 165 FPS. That includes Call of Duty and Real Racing 3. But impressively, I actually tried Real Racing 3 on here and I ran a FPS counter on the home screen. And you can see that when I'm running the game, the OnePlus 15 is able to keep 165 frames per second consistently, like without a single drop. The whole time I'm playing, the frame rate is at 165 FPS. And even when you play a game that is super graphically intensive, like Mobile Legends Bang Bang and PUBG, you can get consistent 120 frames per second, like consistently. The 7,300 mAh battery here definitely matters, particularly if you are used to using a phone with a smaller battery like a S25 Ultra with a 5,000 mAh cell. Because previously, before I jumped to this guy, I was reviewing the Oppo Find X9 Pro, which is kind of like a bigger cousin of this phone. They're like very close siblings. And the Oppo Find X9 Pro has a 7,500 mAh battery. So after I reviewed that, I jumped to the Vivo X300 Pro, which has a 5,400 mAh battery, and the drop-off in battery capacity was immediately noticeable. I actually got a little bit annoyed by how fast this phone ran out of juice compared to the Oppo. So the OnePlus battery life, it's very, very similar to the Oppo. So you're gonna get definitely all day use unless you are absolutely having like the heaviest day. So extremely good battery life, and you have super fast charging at 80 watt for Americans, but you can get up to 100 watt if you're in Asia. So the combination of big battery and fast charging really it saves you from having battery anxiety. The triple chip setup here also matters because the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is probably the most powerful chip you're going to get on the Android side. Absolutely a powerhouse of a chip that can run any app any game, edit any videos on here without a hiccup. The other two chips, one of them is for dedicated Wi-Fi connection, and I do notice faster Wi-Fi speeds on here than compared to like my iPhone 17 Pro Max. And the third chip is a dedicated chip to register touch responses. And I think it matters because I've been saying for years that I think Oxygen OS for OnePlus and Color OS for Oppo are like the most smooth, zippiest, most fluid UI I've seen. Like when I'm just like doing basic things like closing an app, cycling through the app drawer, it just feels a little bit more fluid and smoother on a OnePlus or Oppo device than on any other phone. Maybe except for the iPhone. Like on the Android side, I think OnePlus and Oppo are definitely king, and that new chip help matters. Having the latest RAM configuration also helps because it just speeds up performance. Like I said, this and the Oppo Find X9 Pro are the fastest phone that I've used. Now, the triple water resistance rating doesn't matter that much to me because I'm a city guy. I'm not really a water person, but it should matter a lot for someone who's like maybe working as a lifeguard or someone who goes to the beach a lot. So it does matter to some people, just not to me. And then finally, that gyroscope, also I want to say it doesn't really matter to me because I don't really use the gyroscope enough. Supposedly, it will improve gaming performance that requires gyroscopes, but I don't really see a difference. Like, I don't think the gyroscope in, for example, the Vivo phone, it's any inferior to this guy, even though by the numbers, according to OnePlus, it is a more precise gyroscope here. So the eye-popping numbers from the spec sheets do matter here. This is a very polished, well-rounded device. In fact, I love the look of the OnePlus 15. I mean, it looks just like the Oppo Find X9 Pro, but hey, I love the look of the Oppo Find X9 Pro too. The screen is completely flat, which I know a lot of you guys like. The phone, despite having such a big battery, measures only 8.1 millimeters thick, so that's not thick at all by 2025 flagship standards, and it weighs 211 grams, so relatively lightweight. I'm also a huge fan of this glass panel with this kind of satin silky finish, but it's still grippy because previously, you know, like on the Vivo X100 Pro, I didn't like that silky finish because it was slippery. But this guy, it doesn't feel slippery. It's still pretty grippy. It does not attract fingerprints. And I love how clean the backside looks. It just has a OnePlus logo in the middle. That's it. Previously, on older OnePlus phones, you would have a OnePlus logo here and also a font that says OnePlus. And I always thought that was like overkill. And I also love that the aluminum frame, it's painted to be the same color as the back, and it almost seems seamless. Like, just at first glance, it looks like it's one piece, even though the frame is separate. But I think this is a very classy look. Now, this phone also comes in two other colors I haven't seen, but I am glad I got this as my review unit because I think this color looks better. Okay, now I have to address the elephant in the room. OnePlus and Oppo, they're the same company. Like, they actually admitted this a couple of years ago, but I don't know why now if you ask the marketing team, they still pretend they're separate. Like if you ask Oppo about OnePlus, like they're like, oh, we don't know anything about OnePlus. Even though they're in the exact same factory, they're built by the exact same factory. I'm pretty sure, you know, Pete Lau, the CEO of Oppo, he ultimately decides what goes on with OnePlus too. So they are the same company, and the Oppo Find X9 Pro and the OnePlus 15, they have virtually like identical hardware other than slight differences like different colors, and the Oppo has a thicker camera bump because the camera hardware is a little bit better, but otherwise the dimensions, and when you put the two phones stacked on top of each other like this, exactly the same. The button placements, exactly the same. I mean, this is something that's been going on for a decade now. Anytime OnePlus releases a phone, it's really just like a slightly modified version of a recent Oppo flagship. Now, the reason this is a little bit tricky is because I tend to look at OnePlus more from a US-centric American point of view, and Oppo does not exist there. So OnePlus gets to play in that market as a standalone brand. But if you're someone like me who does cover the mobile scene from a global perspective, it is hard to ignore that every year when OnePlus drops a new phone, I already know that it is just like the recent Oppo flagship that I have, except slightly not as good. Like I would say the OnePlus 15, it's like a 90% as good version of the Oppo Find X9 Pro. Now this sounds like a diss at OnePlus, but it really isn't, because this may be my favorite phone, well, second favorite phone of the year so far. I actually like this a little bit more than the Vivo X300 Pro because I think it's a better all-rounder, and I love this guy. My second favorite phone of the year. And if you're wondering what my number one favorite phone of the year is, it is the Vivo X200 Ultra. I don't think that will be top. So anyway, the OnePlus 15, it's an excellent piece of hardware. Although if you have just tested an Oppo phone, it does feel a little bit of a deja vu. But you know what, to OnePlus and Oppo's credit, they do a pretty good job of separating the two brands so they don't overlap that much. Like usually in Southeast Asia, I will see the Oppo brand a lot and I don't see OnePlus. I don't think OnePlus, the brand, exists in like Thailand or Hong Kong or Singapore. And then likewise, OnePlus sells in the US, whereas Oppo, it's a non-entity in the US. If you are a more regional reviewer, like an American reviewer who doesn't pay attention to phones outside of America, then you can go into the OnePlus 15 with a fresh mind without the shadow of this guy hanging over it. And to be honest, that's how I like to review a OnePlus phone. I know it goes against my usual rules of I don't care where the phones sell, where the market is. I'm going to review as like a global phone. But with the OnePlus, I feel like it deserves attention to review from like an American perspective, because this is really the only representation of a Chinese phone in America. And this is the phone that American YouTubers like MKBHD and Mr. Mobile will actually care about, because those two, they're not going to cover the Oppo Find X9 Pro. At least they're not going to make a long form video on it, but they will make a long form video on the OnePlus 15. So in many ways, the OnePlus phones are designed to go against Samsung and Google and Apple in the US. Like it's not meant to go against the Vivo X300 Pro or the Xiaomi 17 Pro, at least not from my view. And so if I look at the OnePlus 15 from a more US-centric point of view, going against the Google Pixel and Samsung Galaxy, then this guy's hardware, it's amazing. Like all the numbers are at the top of the charts, except the camera hardware, which I teased earlier. So OnePlus is doing with the 15 what Oppo did with the Find X8 Pro. If you remember my review of that, I was a little bit critical of the Find X8 Pro because every image sensor of the Find X8 Pro was smaller than what was used in the Find X7 or the Find X6 Pro. And that's the same here. So the main camera here is a 50 megapixel Sony IMX906 with a 1/1.57 inch sensor and an f1.8 aperture. So the sensor size is a little bit smaller than last year's OnePlus 13 main camera, and the aperture is also a little bit slower. You move on to the periscope zoom lens. This is a JN5 sensor, 1/2.75 inch sensor size, f2.8 aperture. So once again, the sensor size and the aperture are smaller and slower compared to last year's periscope zoom lens on the OnePlus 13. So it's a little bit disappointing at first. However, I do have to mention that sensor size isn't the end all be all. There's still other factors that go into what makes a great smartphone image. And on top of that, the IMX906 here, it is a newer sensor than last year's LYT808. So it is a newer generation sensor, even if the sensor size is a little bit smaller. And I think for the most part, the camera experience here is still satisfactory. The main camera is fast to focus. You still get a little bit of nice natural bokeh. And OnePlus, like Oppo, has given you a lot of fun film simulation profiles, like filters that you can apply to the image to give it a little bit of a different vibe. And I really like some of these filters here. The zoom lens, likewise, it's not going to be able to compete against the zoom lens of the Oppo Find X9 Pro or the Vivo X300 Pro, because it's definitely like a lower tier sensor. But I think for the most part, the zoom lens is still pretty good. The portrait mode is good because OnePlus's algorithm, Oppo's algorithm is very mature. So I really like these portrait shots here. And I think video stabilization is also very good for all three lenses. And also when you switch between all three lenses, it's pretty smooth. Like not as smooth as iPhone, but a lot smoother than Huawei or Honor or Google Pixel phones, definitely. Like the zooming in and out action is pretty seamless for an Android phone. And elsewhere, you also have an ultra-wide camera that's basically on par with all the other ultra-wide cameras out on the market, meaning it's okay, it's fine during the day, but at night the details falls apart and images it's a little bit soft. Every ultra-wide camera on the market, other than the one in the Vivo X200 Ultra, is just like okay. For the front-facing camera, you have a 32 megapixel f2 shooter that does a pretty good job, and you can shoot selfie video in 4K 30 resolution. So ultimately, the camera experience is still pretty good, but I feel like the zoom lens here is a slight downgrade from what the OnePlus 13 gave us. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a OnePlus 13 with me to do a side-by-side testing, but just going by sensor size and aperture and what I remember from the zoom lens last year, I just think that zoom lens was a little bit ahead of this guy right here. On the software front, this phone runs Android 16 with Oxygen OS 15 on top. Now, Oxygen 15 It's almost exactly identical to the Color OS that's running here. Again, that's not a bad thing because I really like Color OS slash Oxygen OS. I think it's the zippiest, most fluid looking UI that I've seen in a phone. Now there's a new button on the left that I haven't talked about yet. This is an AI button, which behaves exactly like the AI button on the Oppo Find X9 Pro. It takes you into this AI space called Mind Space. It's basically a collection of your screenshots or voice memos, and then the AI will go through them, categorize them, summarize them. I think this feature is useful, but seemingly every Android phone this year is giving us that. Like Oppo has it, Honor has it, and nothing has it too. So Oxygen OS, absolutely no complaints whatsoever. Elsewhere for performance, like I said, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, it's an elite chip. You can see the benchmark numbers here. You can play any game, edit videos on CapCut, Luma Fusion. The export time, it's about as fast as you will get from an Android device for now. The only phone that's faster, it's the iPhone. Battery life is tremendous. Best in class. Now, unfortunately, I don't know the price of the OnePlus 15, but I know that in the US, the price is going to be around like $900. Okay, so after I filmed that clip, I did find the official pricing from OnePlus, and my guess was correct. This guy will retail starting at $900 US in the US. This is definitely worth a look if you are an American and you want a new phone. Now, if you ask me to take a step back and look at it from the global market, then I would say this guy needs to be quite a bit cheaper than the X300 Pro or the Oppo Find X9 Pro. If they're similar in price, then get either of these guys over the OnePlus 15. But like I said, I like to review this phone more of as an American reviewer. So yeah, that's about it for this review. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. It would help me a lot. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.